This is kind of rare for me to actually be teaching, so we're going to see how this goes. But I do believe that God has an awesome message for all of us tonight. So we're going to go pray, and then we'll dive right in. Sound good? Yeah. Sweet. All right. Father, thank you for this message. I believe that you have prepared for us tonight. Would you just speak through me? Because we're going to see how this goes. But I pray for all of our hearts that would you please help us to receive what you have tonight. And I pray that this impact would not just impact us tonight, but honestly for the rest of our lives. And so, Jesus, it is by you that we come. Amen. Cool. Alrighty, guys. So we are currently in this series called Living in Babylon, where we're going through the book of Daniel, at least part of it. And last week, what we were in was Daniel chapter 3. And to kind of give you a small recap, that was whenever King Nebuchadnezzar had set up a gold statue and pretty much decreed everyone in the nation to bow down to the statue. But there were three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to bow down. So Nebuchadnezzar, in all of his rage, decided to try to kill Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by throwing them into a fiery furnace, but God delivered them. God brought them out. They didn't even smell like smoke, which is kind of crazy because every time you even just are around a campfire, you got to wash those clothes. You know what I'm saying? But they didn't even smell like smoke. And so God totally delivered them in that moment. King Nebuchadnezzar, what a name. He changed just for a little bit, but then he went right back to his old ways. And so what we're going to be looking at tonight is Daniel chapter 6. So if you want to go ahead, open up, turn on your apps, Daniel chapter 6. And while you're doing that, because we're skipping over chapters 4 and 5, I'm just going to give you all a small synopsis. So in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is still Nebuchadnezzar, and he's just as prideful. And he actually ends up getting another vision or a dream in the middle of the night. And Daniel is brought in, he interprets it, and he says that Nebuchadnezzar, if you change your ways, may this not come upon you, but God's judgment may come upon you because you are still prideful. And that very thing happens. God's judgment comes upon Nebuchadnezzar. He is judged until he's able to see that it is actually God who is King of Kings, and it is God who sets up rulers and not we ourselves. And so that wraps up chapter 4. And then as we go into chapter 5, King Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, is now on the throne, and he is just as prideful as his father. There's a night he is throwing a party for literally 1,000 people, and then out of nowhere, this hand appears and starts writing on the wall. That's where we get the saying, the handwriting's on the wall. Daniel chapter 5, good to know. So while this is going on, the hand disappears or whatever, and no one knows what is written on the wall. No one can interpret it and knows what it says. So Daniel's brought in, and he interprets it for the king. And so what we're actually going to do, we're going to backtrack just a bit, and we're going to pick up reading in Daniel 5:29. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Okay, just so we're on the same page of what just happened. So again, there's a handwriting on the wall. Daniel's brought in. He interprets it. He is then promoted to the third highest in the kingdom. And then Belshazzar is slain according to the interpretation written on the wall. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. And then Darius the Mede takes over the kingdom of Babylon. So if you guys remember, whenever we were in the summit, Pastor Tim was talking about in Daniel, I believe, chapter 2, how there was this gold statue that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed about, and it was made of different material. It was a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, and so on. So if we can actually throw up that image super quick, what just happened is we have just transitioned from the gold head to the silver chest. Can somebody say, whoa? Sweet. Yes, that literally just happened. So we are seeing prophecy happen right now, where now we have gone from the Babylonian kingdom, and we are now entering into the Medo-Persian kingdom, or the empire. And so that's what's happening. So now that we have some context, we're going to dive into Daniel chapter 6. So starting verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps. And just so we can define our terms, satraps is actually very specific to the Persian Empire, and they're more just like governors. So every time we hear that word, just think governor, and they're just kind of populated throughout the Persian Empire because it's massive. So it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps, or governors, to rule the kingdom with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. So the hierarchy is you have 120 satraps, 3 administrators, which Daniel is one, reporting to King Darius. So verse 3. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We shall never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the den of lions. Now, actually, what they said to the king is not true, because there's absolutely no way that Daniel would agree to this. So either one, Daniel was at that board meeting and they totally ignore him, or he was just not at that meeting. And they all just lied, went to the king and say, "Hey, we're all in agreement, including Daniel. You should do this." Verse 8, "Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it into writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, when Daniel had learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles of Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed, and he was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. If you're able to, go ahead and highlight or mark rescue and save. Verse 15. Then men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Again, highlight or mark rescue. Verse 17, "A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, 'Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?'" Go ahead and mark rescue. Verse 21, "Daniel answered, 'May the king live forever. My God has sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty.' The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God." Go ahead and mark trusted. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, People must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. Just highlight that whole thing. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel. Highlight rescued. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay, that was a lot. So at first glance, whenever we read something like this, it's super easy for us just to glance over it because it's kind of like a movie that we've seen 1,000 times. This is a story we've heard 1,000 times. And it's so easy for us just to kind of gloss over everything that's happening. But we have to remember that Daniel didn't know the end of the story. And that means we have to realize the gravitas of his decision to choose to still pray to God even though he knew it could bring death. That's something that we so often miss. And there's another part that we also, when it comes to the lions, what comes into our minds are like the little plush lions we had as kids. That's not this story. What we should be thinking more is like the Colosseum, where Christians were fed to these beasts and completely devoured. This is what we're talking about. And again, the familiarity of this passage can make us feel like there isn't any more application. Like we have sucked all the application out of Daniel in the lion's den. But I'm here to tell you, like, there is so much more than we could possibly imagine. And so as we are in this series of living in Babylon, we have the specific focus of trying to see how do we as Christians approach the coming election? Because it is quite possibly going to bring a lot of division. Like we are already like pretty divided as a country. And knowing that this is coming, there's likely going to be division among our friends, our family. Thanksgiving is coming. Get ready. Thank you. So as we look at this, perhaps actually there is an application that we can pull from this. And now I know at first glance, it'd be like, well, how does Daniel's situation really apply to ours? Like it was a completely different kingdom in the first place. Like they had kings. We have like a 3-branch system of like the legislative and like judicial and all that fun stuff. Like there really couldn't be that much application. But I think by God's grace, there is a lot that we can actually pull from this. And so we're going to dive in that today. So the first thing that I want us to look at is actually the temptations that come up during the election season. And the first one that I want to highlight is the first one I want to highlight is that we often want to subvert authority. And the way that we often go about this, especially in our country and in our culture, is that we become disrespectful of those in power. We make jokes about those in power. We call them names. We say things like, he isn't my president. She isn't my president. And we even go as far to then demonize that person, right? We portray them as evil and wicked. This is the first temptation. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, but they are, or we can't do anything. We're gonna get to that in a second. Calm down. But this is a real problem. They are our authority. And the second temptation is that we often glorify our authority. This especially happens whenever we have someone who's elected and our thought is they are going to save the world. They're going to fix everything that's going on in Ukraine. They're going to fix everything that's going in the Middle East. They're going to fix inflation. They're going to fix everything that's going on the border. They're going to fix my student debt. Whatever it is, we are expecting our candidate to save the world. And we put them on this pedestal. And what happens, especially whenever our candidate does something good, we then become haughty and prideful. Look what my candidate did. Yours didn't do that. And then on the flip side, another thing that comes out of this is that we become combative, especially whenever our candidate does something wrong, and the other side points it out, and we are quick to defend. And please hear me, there's nothing wrong with defending our candidates, and there's nothing wrong with even praising them at times if they do something well. I want to make that clear. But if we cross the line where we become prideful and we are now attacking the opposite side, that is not how Christ has responded, and that is not how we should respond either. So the question then is, what is the correct response? In this time of election, in this time of division that's probably coming, how do we as Christians approach these conversations? Approach our family, approach that professor, approach our classmates. What do we do in this time? And I would say that the first thing that we are to do is to respect and serve. Now, I know that's technically two things, so please forgive me, but for the sake of having 3 points, we're just going to make that one. The first thing that we're going to do is respect and serve. Because when we look back at the life of Daniel, how did he respond to each of the people in authority? King Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius. He respected every single one of them, and they were crazy. Do you remember, like Nebuchadnezzar? He was like, if anyone doesn't bow down, I'm going to cut them to pieces. I'm going to destroy their house. And then at the end of that chapter, he was like, if anyone doesn't worship God, I'm going to kill them and I'm going to crush their house. It's like, bro, calm down. Like, I love the heart, but let's bring it in a little bit. These guys were crazy. And how did Daniel respond? Every single time you see him address someone in authority, he always says, "O king," or "Your Majesty." Never once does he say, "You idiot." Never once does he call him a name. It is always with respect. And this is exactly how we as Christians are admonished to react in the New Testament. Let's look at 1 Peter. 1 Peter 2, 13, 14/17. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Now, this is the really interesting thing. Who was the emperor when Peter wrote this letter? Nero. I heard it. Nero. Excuse me? That's crazy. This is the same Nero under whom Peter died. And Peter's saying, honor him. I don't know about you, but I don't think that's how we react in our country. And if we were to take it a step further and look at the greatest example, Jesus himself, how did he respond to government authority in his life? Whenever he was asked about paying taxes, was he like, psh, not if it don't make sense? Not if I don't feel like it? No, what did he say? Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. And this is exactly what is repeated in Romans 14 to the Romans, obviously, because it's letter written to the Romans. If you have customs, pay the customs. If you have taxes, pay the taxes. Respect those who are in authority. And to take it even one step further, when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane and the soldiers from the temple come to arrest him, how did Jesus respond? You idiots, don't you know I'm the Messiah? Don't you know I'm perfect? Don't you know? Sorry. That's not how he responded. He went with them willingly, but at the same time, he took it a step further. When someone had their ear cut off, thank you, Peter, how did Jesus respond? Well, that's what you get. You look funny. No, he healed his ear. Let me just pose this question super quick. Let's say there was an authority, pick whoever you want, and you were standing 10 feet away from them, and they got shot. And it's the person you do not like. And it was in your power to save their life. Would you do it? And I'm not just talking about anyone, I'm talking about that person. Would you save their life? Would you serve them? I like that. That's the right answer. So that's the first thing, is respect. And as we kind of dive a little bit more into the service, again, how did Daniel respond to Nebuchadnezzar, to Belshazzar, to Darius? He served them faithfully. We read that whenever his accusers tried to find something wrong, they could not find a single thing wrong. Daniel paid his taxes on time. That is a miracle in itself. Daniel did not cheat people. He was honest in all of his reports. They could find nothing under a foreign government that took him captive. His enemies, he served them faithfully. And again, the question is, whenever someone's in authority above us, who we may not like, and even further, may not like us, how do we serve them? Do we do our best? Bless you. This is fun up here. I should do this more often. All right. Sorry, got off track. How are we serving? And again, to look at 1 Peter, to kind of fill in some more context. The last time we read it, we kind of chopped out some verses. Now to give a fuller context, we're going to look at a little bit broader of the passage. 1 Peter 2:11. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles. Where have we heard that? Daniel and the Jews, they were exiles in Babylon. We as Christians, we are exiles on earth in America. Why? Because this is not our true home. Our true home rests in heaven with God our Father. So I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. This is how we are commanded to live. And again, bringing it back to Jesus. How did Jesus respond? You may have heard that saying, if someone wants you to go 2 miles, or sorry, messed that up. If someone wants you to go 1 mile, go 2. You've probably heard that. I think there's actually a lot of context that we don't understand what's going on with that. And so to kind of fill us in, what Jesus is actually talking about was established during the Persian Empire under King Cyrus, who Daniel served, like hundreds of years before Jesus came onto the scene, like incarnate. So what happened is, again, Persia's massive, and they do not have a postal service like we do. What they have is like outposts. So if I want to get a letter from me to Tim, who is like across the kingdom, I have to send my letter from outpost to outpost until it gets to him. Well, at times, they may not have a writer that is available to get the letter to the next outpost. And so I, as the authority, can pick whoever I want and cause them to have to go and deliver that letter to the next outpost despite the inconvenience. Let's say my boy Evan right here. He's just on his way to pay his taxes. And he's like, yo, if I don't pay my taxes, I'm going to jail. I'm like, I don't care. You're going. So I give my dude the letter, and he goes to the next outpost. He doesn't get his taxes in on time. He goes to jail. Oh, well. Sorry, Evan. I love you, my guy. Well, that same sort of system was actually adopted by the Romans, all these empires later. And so exactly how it functioned, I'm not totally sure. Small caveat. But whenever there was Roman occupation in Israel over the Jews, the Romans could do the same exact thing. If Evan is on his way doing something, I can then say, hey, you have to come and serve me as the Roman authority. So when Jesus was saying, if someone compels you, if a Roman authority tells you, hey, go 1 mile, and they are forcing you to do something that you do not want to do, and they do it out of spite and an evil heart, go 2. Whenever we serve, this is such a light for the gospel. Do we have that heart that even if someone is an authority above us who we do not like, who may not even like us, and maybe is even contrary to everything that we are, do we still say, hey, I'm going to serve you? That report that you wanted me to do, I did 2 of them. Whatever it is, fill in the blank. Do we have the heart to say that I love you so much, I'm going to serve you beyond what you've even compelled me to do? So that's the first point, 2 points. Respect and serve. The second thing, the second correct response, is to remember who placed the ruler in charge. And this is something that we see a lot through just the book of Daniel. And just to kind of give some examples, I highlighted Daniel chapter 4 whenever Nebuchadnezzar is under judgment of God. And right before that happens, God speaks, I believe, through Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar. And he says, the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. God is in complete control of every single throne on this planet. We see this again in Daniel 5:28. Perez. So if you remember some context, we kind of started at the end of chapter 5, and they were like, we don't know what this says. This is one of the words that was written on the wall that Daniel then interpreted. Perez. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. God was saying, this kingdom is no longer yours. I'm giving it to someone else. God is in complete control of who is in authority and who receives authority. Being accused for things he's never done. And Jesus' response, you would have no power over me if it was not given to you from above. Do we realize who is actually in control? And this is extremely important when it comes to this coming election for 2 reasons. If your candidate is not elected, you need to trust God. You need to trust that God's sovereign plan is way greater than our current comfort in this time and our plans that we want to prosper. And the second thing is if your candidate is elected, you need to look to God. Now, I know this kind of sounds like a no-brainer, and it can kind of just be dismissed. And so for us to kind of really paint this picture and see the gravitas of this, let's look at it like this. So we mentioned Nero earlier, terrible guy. During the time he was persecuting the Christians, he would tie them to poles and light them on fire just to light the streets. Terrible guy. So let's say we're under Nero's authority. We're living in Rome, 64 AD. At that time, we are trusting God. We're like, God, please bring someone else like you did with Darius and remove Belshazzar. We are trusting you. But at the same time, we are trusting that your plan is going to be far greater and far more reaching than we can see right now. In that moment, it's really easy to trust. Well, it may not be easy to trust God, but we can see the importance of trusting God in that moment. Fast forward 300 years, and this guy named Constantine comes onto the scene. He becomes emperor, and he becomes a Christian. He decriminalizes the persecution, or he decriminalizes just Christianity in general, and he instates Christianity as the national religion. He is the complete opposite of Nero. At that time, we're looking at Nero, or we're looking at Constantine. Dude, that's my man. I ain't got to die anymore. I can have a small business. This is awesome. So let's go ahead and let's just pretend we just take the 300-year gap between those two. We toss it out. They're back-to-back rulers, and we're under both of their rule. We go from trusting God under Nero, and the moment our dude steps into power, we go from trusting and looking to God. Now we're looking at Constantine. Look what my guy can do. Look what he did for me. What else can he do for me? What other world problems can he solve? We are no longer looking to God. We are now looking to who God has just placed on the throne. And so keeping that perspective that we must continue to trust God whenever there are rulers that we may be against and who may be against us, and continuing to look to God, this will keep us from subverting authority. And this will keep us from glorifying that authority. And then finally, we need to trust the true King. I have a question for you guys. Who are you looking to for deliverance? Because if you remember, we went through and highlighted all the times we saw the word rescued and saved. And so we're just going to look back at those super quick. Verse 14, when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Verse 16, so the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. Verse 19, at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Verse 26, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. I also just want to say super quick to the band, that was the wrong question. Do not come up yet. You know who you are. Don't come up. There's another question. You'll see. Don't come up yet. Sorry. Anyway, resuming. What's really interesting is that the king ultimately could not save Daniel, even from himself. Now, I want to make clear that yes, kings and rulers can do powerful things. Think of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. He kept the country together. He brought in the beginning of the abolition of slaves. Think of Ronald Reagan. He got them to tear the wall down in Germany. These guys can do great things because of the power that God has given them. But they cannot solve everything. They cannot solve our greatest needs. And everything that they do solve, that power is given to them by God. And so what I want to challenge you guys with, we need to be looking to the true King for our deliverance. And to kind of put that in perspective, if your finances are struggling because of inflation, you need to trust Jesus. If you're trying to stay in America but it's difficult because of foreign policy, you need to trust Jesus. If you are displeased with how authorities are handling the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, you need to trust Jesus. But at the same time, this also goes beyond politics. So I understand that people in this room could probably care less about politics, and I have lost you for like the past 20 minutes. Understandable. But again, this goes beyond that. Because there are things in our lives, if it is not the government and if it's not rulers, there are other things that we are looking to for deliverance. Maybe it's a relationship in the midst of loneliness. Maybe it's money, thinking that that will help you be accepted by other people. Maybe it's a college. You think that depending on the college you go to, you're going to be able to impress other people. Or maybe it's just a career where you think that that's going to give you the stability that you need to have a comfortable life. In all of these things, we need to trust Jesus. Trust Jesus to meet you in your loneliness. Trust that you are accepted by Christ because of his death and resurrection, even if no one else accepts you. Think of Jesus whenever he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and all of his disciples left. That dude was alone. but he wasn't, because the Father was still with him. And that's all that he needed. Maybe you need to trust that your identity is found in him and not the college that you go to. Or maybe you need to trust that Jesus' provision in your life is what you need, not the job or the career. Who are you trusting? And so this leads to the actual question, so the band can come on up. Who holds your trust? Is it a ruler? Is it a thing in your life? If you remember, I had you also highlight another word besides rescue and save, and that was trusted. And if you look back at verse 23, Daniel had trusted in his God. He did not trust Darius to deliver him. He trusted his God. Could you imagine what would happen if Daniel trusted Darius? We wouldn't have Daniel 6 through whatever. Like, it would just stop. Daniel would have been gone. But because he trusted in his God, God delivered him. Now, this is not to say that if I trust God, everything's going to be peachy and perfect in my life. That is not to say that. But it is our role to trust him beyond all else. And so I really want to encourage you guys to take, whether it's this time during this song, tonight when you go home, tomorrow, sometime this week, who holds your trust? Is it a candidate on the ballot, or is it the king on the throne? As we go into this election season and every single season after that, who holds your trust? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this message and for this opportunity to grow. This is certainly a challenging thing to trust you, especially when things are such at odds in this time in our country. There's so much questioning, there's so much division, and there's so many things that we want to look to for deliverance. And there's so many ways that we want to respond to the things that are going around us. But I pray that would you give us the grace to respond correctly to those who are in authority, that no matter who is elected this upcoming season, that we would not subvert or glorify, but that we would serve and that we would honor and that we would remember who has placed them in authority and that we would remember who is ultimately on the throne, and that is you. And I pray that we would continue to look to you. And I pray for those who are looking to something else besides you. It may not be politics, but it could be a relationship, finances, you name it. I pray that tonight that they would find their trust in you, their hope in you, and their deliverance in you. Thank you for this group. I pray that you would continue to bless them and you continue to draw them closer to you. And it is by Jesus that we come. Amen.